Oh, there we go. So if I speak right here, it works. I just hate the reverberation, so if you hear it, I'm not hearing it because I'm here, so let me know. So we're going to talk about SciTech translation, but it does apply to a lot of things, and actually for literary, knowing about these intricacies, it's, to me, it's really cool, so I'm hoping for you to. Let's see. Oh, my things. So now I do this, yes. This is a little bit about me. I'm a freelancer. I studied in biochemistry, did pharmacological stuff and medical instruments. I ended up at MIS, where I was supposed to become an interpreter, but I fell in love with localization. So I became a localizer. I opened the localization degree, now run by one of my students, one of my first graduates. So it makes me very proud. These are my languages and some of the clients that I've worked with, and I volunteer in different professional organizations. ITraining. Training really starts when we come out of school. So these are the topics we're going to talk about. Technical translation. We hear a lot that it's about the concepts and the terminology, but there's a whole lot beyond that. Text features go beyond the terminology, the text features of lengthy, complex texts. And we want to apply plain language to explaining complex ideas. So hopefully I'll give you some plain language tips that you can take away. And we're going to look at those idiosyncrasies that I was talking about and see how we can manage them better. So when we talk about excuse me, a technical field, definitely we have complexity, and there's a variety of interests and levels of expertise that we write for. And somebody, I'm working a lot in plain language, and there's this idea that, oh, plain language is about simplifying the explanation. Sometimes it's not. Richard Feynman was asked, a Nobel Prize winner, Mr. Feynman, can you please summarize this in a sentence? And basically his answer was this: it wouldn't be worth the prize if I could do that, because then that means that I wouldn't have discovered anything. Discovery takes work, and it takes a lot of text to explain it. The problem that we have in technical translation is that sometimes people do things like this. The consequences of every vernacular utilized irrespective of necessity to mean we're using words needlessly. And this was a paper that got an Ig Nobel Prize. Do you know what the Ig Nobel Prize is? So that this year I had to give you guys this one. A medicine Ig Nobel Prize for collecting evidence that pizza might protect against illness and death if made and eaten in Italy. Being obscure in technical writing is a thing, and is a thing, first and foremost, my personal opinion is that people don't know how to write. But there is also such a thing as wanting to be obscure because you don't want to be criticized, because you want to appear important. And so we want to do away with that and convey ideas clearly. So we're going to take a look at this text, and we're going to look at what features other than terminology are there that make these texts academic and not, your regular Facebook post. Are you guys cold?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So, it went on again?
Yeah, I hear it, but I don't feel it.
Maybe it's just giving us air. So we can breathe it, hopefully. Do you feel it on again?
Yeah, it's on.
When that happens, if the battery needs replacing, that happened in our hotel room.
Okay. try that. Hopefully it'll turn off because it is cold. So what are some of the features that we can see here? Definitely, excuse me. Definitely some of the, oh, where am I? Definitely some of the terminology, colorectal cancer, phenotype, genotypic biomarkers, so the terminology is there. There's also structures that are there that we're not usually finding in regular language. Is associated with, can be reduced, so the use of the passive. Also, picking up ideas, cohesion, repetition of ideas. These are preventive strategies. Among such strategies, we're looking, is one of the strategies, let's see, is these, I'm going to do something to make sure that this is, this one doesn't want to cooperate with me, so some of the highlighting is not in the right places, but I'm going to show you here. Among such strategies, and then we repeat the word, we hypothesize that these can become an important strategy, so this ability to repeat. Another thing that we have is markers, similarly. Another thing that we have is metacognitive language. We hypothesize. So all these features, hopefully these will make it clearer. All these features are features of technical text that we have to deal with. And these are some of the things that can be poorly written and create obscurity that we can fix. And by the way, the presentation, if you go to my website, which is languagecompass.com, and click on ATA 60, plug in the password ATA 2019, you can download the presentation. So some of these features, one of the features that is vilified by plain language is nominalization, and yet we need it in our technical writing. What does nominalization do for us? Nominalization is able to condense meaning, so it creates an abstraction out of an action with an agent. So it summarizes information really. It allows us to be able to talk about things in a logical, rhetorical way rather than a chronological way. We replace a hip replacement, right? So, and it can be a cohesive strategy. We can nominalize so that we can refer to things backward. For instance, surgeons remove this and that. The removal, so instead of having a huge sentence, long sentence, we put a period, we pick it up again with nominalizing the verb or first sentence, and we create a rhythm. So what happens when we use verbs with these, we see things tangibly. In nominalizations, we can see things more abstractly. So nominalization is a huge part of technical writing. Sometimes, and these will apply especially to fields other than technical, in English, nominalizations are a little bit stuffy. So we want to use other strategies. What are other strategies that we can use? We can revert to the action of the agent in a nominalization. The improvement maybe sounds too grandiloquent, and so we can, improvement of quality is pump up the quality, bring up the quality. We can use a sensory image. Shared knowledge and understanding can become, we're all on the same page. And we can use a different cohesive strategy. And in English, the gerund is a great filler for nominalizations. Instead of talking about the postponement of something, putting off this on that. So this is a great strategy for creating adequacy for audiences that are not technical. How do we bring plain language into all this? Plain language is writing in such a way that the reader can easily find the information, understand it, and apply it. So it's love at first read. And this definition by the Plain Language Association, I feel it applies to not only language for lay audiences, but language for technical audiences. My view of writing is that we have to build coherence in text, what I call textuality. Some people call, some grammarians call it coherence. Some people call it wording, drafting. So when we create text, it needs to be coherent. Then we can think about the adequacy. Is this coherent text going to technical audiences? Then the register is this and that. Is this coherent text going to a lay audience? Then maybe we need to change some things to adapt them, not because they're not clear, but because the register is not adequate. And so all these different aspects of the purpose of the text, the grammar we're using, the coherence, the structure, and the design of it, all apply to making sense first and then adapting it for your audience. So a couple of examples of plain language in action. You must get rid of them. You must get rid of our children? No, that's not what I meant. I know that's not what you meant, but that's what you wrote. So we need to write it clearly. You must get rid of, nominalization is a good one here. You must get rid of those emotions, those feelings, those attitudes. So this one is a technical example. Both age and pharmacotherapy are associated with higher adherence to the cessation program. What does it make you think? This is about smoking cessation, quitting smoking. So pharmacotherapy, they give them other things to the patients, right? Or to the participants. Age, older people, does it make you think that older people are more likely to stop, right? But this is what it says after. So this is poorly written because it doesn't lead us to this conclusion. So we're going to look at how to fix that. And then, what is adequacy? It's not grammatical correctness, it's not the coherence and logic of the text. We can say the same clear thing in technical language or in lay language. And they're both perfectly fine texts. We just are addressing different audiences. Just to give you my little cheat sheet of the things that I look at when I look at text. I look definitely at how the audience is addressed, what's the purpose of the text, so does the design and structure fit that purpose, but mostly as a writer, I'm looking at grammaticality, which includes syntax, punctuation, word order, and I'm looking at coherence. Are there cohesive strategies used, and is logic properly used? So, in terms of purpose, this was a text and purposely unreadable right now, because this is a chunk of text that is not inviting. It's like a wall. So the reader doesn't want to go in. So you need to invite your reader in. This is a brochure about hysterectomies, and that's the conversion. So we are not only using design through visual support, headings, subheadings, captioning, we are also using better coherence inside, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So this idea that plain language or writing more clearly sometimes is about substituting words for easier words, doing a sort of one-on-one substitution. Incapacitating, disabling, disorder is a condition, neurovascular nature that affects the blood vessels, blah, blah, blah. it has to do with a lot more than that. You want the coherence inside, you want the structure of it. If you're making different points, can you use a list to make it easier to access? Can you use visual support, etc.? So recently I read this white paper from Lionbridge and I am appalled. I am truly appalled because it opposes scientific language to plain language, thinking that scientific language is by nature obscure, and that is not the case. It is obscure because people don't know how to write, people don't want to be understood, people don't want to be criticized for their ideas, because if you don't understand it, and there was a wonderful example of this that was run, an experiment that was run, they trained an actor to deliver a paper called Quantum Mechanics Applied to Clinical Medical Practice. The doctors listened to him, they were mesmerized, he did a great job, they left thinking like this was a great presentation. Then they were asked, what did you learn? Zilch. They could not apply one single thing because it didn't make sense. But they were doctors, and these are people who think themselves are very, very smart, right? But this guy was talking about quantum mechanics. So kind of physics trumped physicians. So they couldn't tell this guy who was supposedly an astrophysicist, we don't know what you're saying. And he wasn't even. He was just an actor trained to do that. So my view of plain language is that it really applies to communication in general, and then we can adapt to a lay audience, and then we can further adapt and simplify to audiences with cognitive disabilities. If you work in a technical field, you may have heard about accessibility, and in the US we have the section 508 in one of our federal regulations about providing accessibility for people with disabilities, which does not just include people with visual or hearing impairments, but people with cognitive disabilities. So that's a completely different field. We're simplifying content for people who have a limited ability to understand or a limited ability with the language. Sometimes we use, I don't know if you've ever looked at simple English Wikipedia. It's really cool. They really adapt content for children even. So let's look at some of the idiosyncrasies that we work with. What are idiosyncrasies in language? What is special about each of the languages that we speak? We have particular lexicons. So a word like empower is really hard to translate. And that's why we have some horrible words that we use now in French and Spanish and Italian. But then we have beautiful words, like mareggiare. Who can tell me what that means in English? It's walking in the shade in a hot summer afternoon. Isn't it beautiful? This word that I love in French, dépaysement. Who can tell me what that means? Feeling homesick, but it's feeling homesick by being removed. And there is a sense that is harder to say in English. The word caricia in Spanish, if we say caris in English, there's a whole bunch of different connotations that don't apply. We have syntactic mismatches, and that we're going to talk a lot about this today. Dance the night away. How do you say that in your language? In another language that is not English. It's hard, right? Yes. Ci se ne poteva fidare. Oh, it's like a maze of pronouns and participes, and, right? So the differences between formal and informal, the way we construct verbs, we can go on and on with syntactic differences. And then there's also obviously also rhetorical style. In English, in technical English, we love the passive voice, and in other places it's very appropriate. We use different techniques in other languages. Cabe resaltar, occorre valutare, all these different si può, se deve, on observe. that they don't translate. It's just the rhetorical ways that we have in different languages, and sometimes we do this so automatically we don't realize it. Wow, we're doing actually a very neat cultural transfer here. So, in dealing with idiosyncrasies, we have these sort of continuum of options. We can domesticate the translation, or we can leave it kind of foreign sounding, and there's these different schools of thoughts and these things, but I want to bring this up because this helps us see how we can sometimes transform these weird sounding phrases in the target language. So these verbs of results in Romance languages, quitarse, cogerse, so we can go with remove in English, which is okay. We can also go with take off or get off, and then we can go into different ways of taking it off. Are you sliding it off? Are you pulling it off? So English has this ability to incorporate the manner, and it's very natural sounding to English speakers. So, do I have that here? I don't have that here, but Dan Slobin, the linguist, did a research about how translators do this, and he looked at translations from Tolkien texts, I think The Hobbit. And he found that a lot of times the languages had a hard time, Italian, Spanish, French had a hard time translating words like he slid away, he snuck out. And then they had people, they changed a couple of words so that people would recognize it was Tolkien, because then a lot of people would know, but they did a back translation into English. And all those little cool things like he slid out, he snuck away, were lost in English. So in this translation, this is sort of going from Italian to English. Remove, pull it, invert. You can kind of understand the technique, because what happens when you take out gloves, when you're using them, is that you cannot touch the skin, then otherwise you're contaminated. So how do we explain this in English in a way that is more natural sounding? So a lot of times, this is also a great technique for post-editing, because machine translation works with word math, and it connects things that are similar, and it's not necessarily that this is connecting false cognates, but it's a good thing to have in mind when you're post-editing machine output. Why is this? Because we have these different features in language, and they have a name. Linguists have a name for this. English is a satellite frame language, and Romance languages are a verb frame language. And I found out recently something that is very fascinating to me. Latin was a satellite frame language. So, just to give you a different idea to think about, English is the lingua franca of today, Latin was the lingua franca of its day, it was the Roman Empire, maybe framing has something to do with how people do things, but we won't go into that philosophical discussion. So this is the picture of a doctor. What is he doing?
Hurrying
Running out. So here he's running out. How do we say that in Romance languages? We don't say running out. We say in all kinds of different ways, but not running out. Oh, this is it. So this is the Slobin research, and what he found is that when going into Romance, we have to forget the manner. The manner is not discovered, it's not recovered when we go back into English, because in Romance languages we would never say, when we say a bird entered the room, that he entered walking. We will always think that he flew in, but we won't say it. So in English we say he flew in, it flew in Spanish, in French, in Italian, we would say it entered. So this is the back translation was a verb entered, and so what we can do better than that is fluid. So we can recover those phrasal verbs that sound so natural in English. This is an idiosyncrasy that has to do with fronting verbs, usually for impersonal, in French and Italian and Spanish and Portuguese. Se refiere, è obligatoria, se multiplie. So all these things that we use for basically not fronting this agent of the action, which is okay in technical writing, right? We would use the passive in English. So the passive, which is vilified by a lot of plain language quick tips, it's a great, amazing resource in English. And it helps us do all kinds of things. It helps us talk about the object of a situation, removing the subject, and sometimes that's very helpful. I was editing a text that a coach, a writer, an editor had changed. It's a memoir. The writer was saying, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and it changed my life. And the editor, thinking that she was applying plain language to it, said, Dr. So-and-so diagnosed me. No disrespect to the doctor, who cares? Who diagnosed you? So it has a place to really talk about the object. It has a place to talk about a subject, an event when we don't know who did it. I love this example. This is a Twitter from a couple of years ago. It wouldn't be the same if you put Amazon first. And then it allows us to talk about something that it requires a lot of explanation. So this is about Oedipus, and the baby had been brought to the house by a shepherd who had been told. If we say it the other way around, it actually creates more confusion. So when we have these impersonal expressions in Romance languages, the passive voice is a great resource. So we're going to do a little practice. These are some of the highlighted expressions that are in the Spanish text and the translation, the first draft into English. Manage to penetrate, enter the lead vocabularies, accelerate, start to invade. It's not bad, right? But we're going to look at them again, and this is the final version. We will wade through, and this was a text for high school. They're hurried along, they work their way into. So we have all these nifty verb expressions that we can use in English to make it, again, this is creating adequacy also for a younger audience. This is the first sentence is a little bit of background, but what I want to focus on is about using graduated cylinders. If you have to fill a cylinder or reach a certain mark. So the cylinders have marks all over here. We need to pay attention to how the meniscus, how the curving of the liquid happens. And here's another issue that we have really from the translation from Italian. The liquid which you are working with forms. That's very hard in English to process. So how can we improve this? This is the first draft. This is the final draft. We can use pour a cylinder full. We can use add up to a certain mark, and we can use the passive. And if you read it again, it reads easier. The passive just alone. We have news about the health risks make the headlines. Also, this is a quite literal translation. News don't make the headlines, do they? So what can we do? In English, we like being bolder. So the health risks made the headlines. And then parents were alarmed, pediatricians flooded with questions, stored, sold out. So the passive voice is a great tool also here to pick up information and create a more natural sounding text in English. So the strategies that we've practiced with these examples of the cylinders and the news, we use phrasal verbs, we use resultative constructions, resultatives of things like wipe the table clean, and the passive voice to shed light on the object rather than the subject. Parents were alarmed by the news. We already know, we were talking about the news, the biphenol, the non-biphenol, the biphenol containing. So if we already know that piece of information, we can skip the subject and just go to what the object, how was the object affected. Parents were alarmed, pediatricians flooded with questions. These are a couple of other examples for doctors diagnosed me early enough. I was diagnosed early enough. So these are, again, just techniques that you can use to play around with text. How do we work with nominalization? This is interesting because I said nominalization is about rhetorical organization more than narrative organization. And in French, this makes perfect sense. The changes in management are based on knowledge that create a different understanding of the disease. How does this work in, if you want to create a more natural sounding English text? We really start at the beginning. We start with our knowledge and creates a better understanding, and therefore we manage the disease differently. And also, if you see there continues to be one noun, knowledge, but then there's no longer understanding of the disease, but understand. And there's no longer change the management of the disease, the change in management of the disease, but we changed the management of the disease. So just to remind you, nominalization is not an evil feature of language. It's there to do certain jobs, and sometimes what it allows you to do is to focus on the product of an action versus the process. So the surgeons were doing surgery and they replaced but that replacement allowed this patient to go back to school. This is about the picture is not, but this is about the real case where Doctors Without Borders intervened in a very extreme case of need, and a child from Southeast Asia was operated on in France. She recovered her life. So what happens sometimes is that if we go with what we are given in our source text, we create this sort of confusing situation for English. So in Italian it's a very long phrase, but it's okay because rhetorically this is okay in Romance languages. In English we create the same long phrase, long sentence, and it's harder to parse. So what can we do? We can create a pause, a period, pick it up with the nominalization. So instead of using the nominalization here, early removal of large colorectal polyps, what we can do is say remove first, and then several techniques are available to remove most large colorectal polyps early. Early removal of these polyps remains, and so we can give the reader a pause, pick up the idea, and give them the next concept in the next sentence. So creating an obscure versus a clear piece of text, right? And this is just to show you that this is a cohesive technique that refers back to something that we said in the previous sentence with the verb. So we can use cohesion to shorten a sentence. And another example of different adequacy, we can, now that we have a clear piece of text, adapt it for a lay audience. So several techniques are available. If we're telling this to a patient, it's a little bit too academic. So doctors use different techniques, and again, is instead of the early removal, taking away these pollens, the gerund as an adequacy or as a different way to nominalize. Just highlighting that. So another interesting replacement, interventions, we can use in cohesion. This is called a hypernym. A way is a more general noun, an umbrella noun, and so intervention is appropriate for technical audiences, but it may sound a little bit too academic for a general public. So strategies so far, I'm going to keep adding. We have used those phrasal verbs, entered to flew in. We have the resultative constructions. Pour the cylinder full, wipe the table clean. We have used passive, and we have used nominalization to summarize information, to create rhetorical flow, and as a cohesive strategy to pick up information from the previous sentence. Some of one of the techniques that I was talking about is the gerund. And so the gerund is an interesting device in our languages because it usually talks about simultaneity. So we are doing the ing form in our languages talks about simultaneity, but it can be used for other things. It can be used to express sequence, and in English it doesn't sound so sequencey. So, ayant reçu des résultats, having received the results, doesn't sound too bad, but we might want to actually state for the reader the use of that gerund. So once the results were there, once, and even here is the ayant reçu des résultats, once the sensitivity test confirmed, because this is also about the patients, so we can even summarize information even more. I'm going to give you a second to read through. Let's go to another example. There being a conflict. It's okay, we understand it, but when there is a conflict. So the value of the gerund in our languages can be expressed through connectors in English. It can express concession. Two shareholders still control the voting rights, having retained only 15% of the shares. So we understand this, that's good, but we can express it even more clearly through a concessive connector in English, even though they only retain 15% of the shares. We can express consequence with the gerund. So opening the possibility. So this is just it's a statistical consideration. Age, you go, it's continuous. You go from 0 to many years. And what they're trying to do here is they're trying to create categories. So those are, how do you change a continuous variable to a categorical one? You create brackets. So I'm sure you've checked many times. All of us right now between 25 and 35 years of age. So that creates a category versus a continuous variable. And so opening the possibility to including them in the final model, well, the result was that they could now be in the final model because we needed categories in that model. So why don't we just say that, the result, as a result. And again, the technique is always the same. What is the gerund's function? How can I express it through a connector in English? And just an observation that the gerund is used for different things in English that cannot be used for in Romance languages. It can be a subject. Walking is fun. It can be an object. We would suggest refining the instrument. It can be a complement. What kept us going was reaching the at-risk population. So all these, we cannot say the passengers flying American in our languages because who fly? I hate when I hear at the airports, pasajeros viajando a Madrid, and who? Pasajeros con destino a Madrid. So this is something to take into account if you're translating from English into those languages, right? So again, a quick summary of the strategies that we've seen so far. We looked at verbs, we looked at resultative constructions, we looked at the passive voice, nominalizations, and the gerund. And now we're going to look at plain language. And if you ever come to a plain language workshop by me, you will always hear me talk about parallel structure. I absolutely dislike, I was going to use another word, but I absolutely dislike when authors do not use parallel structures. It makes text way harder to parse, and you don't need to. And it's interesting, sometimes when you have a list, you should do exercise to maintain a good health. For instance, going for a walk, hike, swimming, a race. You're all over the place. Why not running and walking and hiking? Why not going for a walk or taking a hike? So if you're, oh, but that one doesn't work. The last one doesn't work, so it has to be different. Change all the other ones. You're a smart person, you can change all the other ones. So here we have scaffolding is breaking up the learning, and then you provide a tool. Why? When you can say breaking up the learning and providing a tool. So this is basically just to say we want all those different gears turning. We just did what kind? Something I see a lot in technical writing, garden paths. So if you read that, you want your eyes went through it twice.
3 times.
3 times, thank you. Because we want to read that as a unit. Because our eyes are, we are so used to seeing her as a possessive. And her students makes perfect sense. So why don't we use that? The new data convince her that students. So another little quick tip from plain language sometimes says, nix that. Nix that. Because it's a wonderful particle to, or, oh no, you can get rid of needless words like prepositions, and then you end up with a pile. One of my favorite ones was my cable company, and this is a true notice. Your buried cable technician will come to fix your device. And I'm like, well, from 6 feet under, that's marvelous. Punctuation is huge, but parallel structure I feel is huger. So this is an actual case that was won by truck drivers from a dairy company in somewhere in the East Coast. And what they argued was that these didn't have a comma. So canning, processing, preserving, packing for shipment or distribution. So all these people were exempt from overtime pay. The truck driver said, but we're not processing, preserving, freezing, or packing. We're driving. We are distributing. So they asked for 13 million, they ended up getting $5 million in back pay. But one of the things that is interesting to me, and that the lawyer, who's a pretty good linguist, didn't pick up on, is there's also no parallel structure between distribution, because the Oxford comma may or may not, it's a stylistic, sometimes it's a stylistic choice, right? So the series comma. So also, there's no comma here, but also distribution is aligned by parallel structure to shipment. If they had said no comma, packing for shipment or distributing, I would have won the case for the company. So these are some examples of the piling that happens. This one I read this, and seriously, it took me such a long time to figure out what he was talking about. And this is recent, actually, because this just happened. I have my very careful technician there. Beyond syntax and grammar and punctuation, we also want to have coherence and cohesion. Another example of leading the reader to the wrong conclusion. It was observed at both age and educational level. So this makes you think at both age and educational level, right? Well, then it says this, that you need to take greater care in explaining clinical trials to the elderly. So it's a very similar example to the one we saw. With age, there's less comprehension. So we need to really, and it was emphasized by information farther down the text. But why are we making people think twice? When we can just say something like, they had opposite correlations, and already make them think. The opposite correlation doesn't tell you which one goes which way, but at least you know, like, oh, now I expect you to tell me which way they go. Am I going backwards? Okay, this is the one I want to. And it's a longer text because it does take sometimes a little bit more to fix something. When we read through these, the sentences are okay. We understand. You close your eyes. Can you remember it? So what's happening here is this is spitting out information in a memoristic way, and it's not really creating a full picture for the reader. So I'm going to show you the analysis of this in terms of how the information is flowing. We have going from the surgery, it's called a hysterectomy. The removal of the uterus is really connected to here, not to here. Relief symptoms, hysterectomy. So we forgot the symptoms and went back to the hysterectomy or the removal of the uterus. Fact, fact, fact. It's hard to remember. What if we do this? So we're just shifting around information and adding a couple of connectors. And it makes such a difference to remember this abstract. And I'm going to show you the analysis of flow information again. And I have to tell you, I actually sometimes do this with the text. When it's very obscure, I parse it. And so it's not something that I will tell you, okay, you should do it every time, because it does take time, but it's something that it will come into your mind once you practice to help you shuffle around the information for better understanding. So now hysterectomy is a surgery that removes the uterus. The removal of the uterus, again, that nominalization for technical writing, relieves symptoms caused by other conditions. If a woman has uterine cancer, which may be one of these conditions, a hysterectomy may be necessary, but it is a major procedure. So, because of it, let's be careful in choosing it. So now we're creating a rhythm and a crescendo of information. And all we did was shift things around and added a couple of connectors. So, what are some of the ways to shift things around in English? We may need to put something, an old piece of information in a different place. We may need to pick up a reference. We may need to separate by bad neighbors, like guilt and vengeance are destructive for you and your children. You must get rid of them. Those are bad neighbors. We may want them for effect, like in the Amazon. Whole Foods was bought by Amazon, who packs a paperclip in a refrigerator box. And so some of the ways that we can shift things around is by recasting the sentence. And in English we have a lot of techniques for recasting. Saying the same thing in different ways. We can use the subject, the whole sentence as a subject. We can use an extra post subject clause. We can use an existential clause, there is. We can use a dummy subject, which we do use a lot in English. A cleft sentence, it was so-and-so who discovered. So we're emphasizing a different aspect of so-and-so discovered this vaccine. We can front information. For instance, if I say, we fight opposing lawyers with confidence. We don't have confidence? With confidence, we fight opposing lawyers. So there we're just simply fronting a compliment and changing the whole, I have one for the interpreters out there. He was he was advised to force fluids through his interpreter. Poor interpreter. So we can just front that compliment through his interpreter. He was advised to force fluids, and he refused, and therefore he was dehydrated. And this was a medical report. So a couple of examples in real text of some of these techniques. What is putting old information before new information? The Virginia opossum is the only marsupial species in North America. Like kangaroos and other marsupials, female opossums rear their young in a fur-like pouch. So if we put the complement here, only marsupial species, female opossums, but we're not explaining what marsupials are. And so by putting marsupials that we had just mentioned in the previous sentence, we are telling the reader, hey, there comes a definition. So we're helping the reader understand. This is the one for meaning. And it's like, we don't need to do that. We don't need to hope that the reader understands what we meant. We can just switch it around and mean it. We can use verb choice in English. This is a wonderful tool. Give and receive, sell and buy, lend and borrow. So we can focus on different aspects of the information. So the Mona Lisa was famously stolen. We're talking about the Mona Lisa. The Louvre was famously robbed, because we're talking about the Louvre. It was very interesting, actually. It's a real case. It happened, and it's one of the reasons why the Mona Lisa is so famous, actually. So strategies in plain language that we looked at in grammar, punctuation, and coherence, etc. Parallel structure. Fixing ambiguity. Her students, for instance, we told her that students, the forking paths. Punctuation for logic. Punctuation is a pause for the mind and not for the breath. Restatement of information. We switch things around to make it clearer. We used recasting of sentences. Reflowing a whole paragraph, just moving the pieces and adding some connectors. So this is a bit of a summary of cohesion and coherence strategies that you can use. Repetitions, we saw in the example about colorectal cancer. Among different strategies, this is a strategy for prevention, this is another strategy for prevention, so we're using repetition, which is perfectly okay in English. Sometimes if you want to do Romance language, you have to use a different cohesion strategy. You have to use hypernyms, family of words, because repetition is sometimes frowned upon. Grammatical, we're looking at references, we looked at shifting sentences around, and in the example for the hysterectomy, we looked at information flow and how we can reshape that paragraph to make it, to help the reader create a picture of what you're talking about versus just spitting out all the facts. And that may be perfectly correct, but they're hard to retain. These applies not only to text, we can be clear or obscure in structure of text, which, for instance, and this is real. In 2017, I gave a talk about plain language, and I used the .gov area of the website where I was looking to get in touch with my congressman because I wanted tickets to the White House. So we lived in Florida at the time, and it was way closer than from California. And in order to get there, I had to go through all these different agencies of the government. For instance, architecture of the Capitol. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know there was such a thing, but of course, buildings need to be maintained and all these. And then down the line, over here on the webpage was the Congress. And they changed this. They changed the structure of the website because it was, all the agencies appeared in alphabetical order. And as a citizen, the architecture of the Capitol, I know I'm paying for that, but I don't really want to hear how you're cleaning the baseboards of the building. So they reshifted that, and they are now, you can now access that page and look at, and I have screenshots to prove it. To look at actually getting in touch with the congressman, which if you're looking at Congress as a citizen, you need to know who's there, how to get in touch with them. Another, and this is structure of the message. Another aspect is the design. These, and interestingly, you don't see, there's skulls behind here. And so it's distracting. This one is a little bit better. This one is even better. Because it teaches you both visually and through text that the structure of our bones is lighter than it would be if they were dense, but that makes it very strong. So visualization, data visualization is a huge field. It's fascinating, and sometimes we want to have fancy ways of showing things in graphics. Is it easy to read?
Yes.
It's easy. Okay, so you can read the names easily. Can you compare Sao Paulo and Mexico City? Because sometimes we need help, right? But how about a table? Just a plain old table. Sometimes plain old devices are just fine. These allow you to compare the cities much better. So because we have all this technology and all these devices, sometimes we get excited and we go into all these possibilities when all we need is a simple answer. So this is actually a cool visualization of what people, every dot shows 1,000 people, what people are doing at different times of day. So definitely data visualization is a cool tool in the right circumstances. So So and it explains, and there's a the visualization I think goes for 24 hours. So you can see it live. You can Google it and see it live. Going through all of the strategies that we've seen today, we can treat verbs in a way that sound more natural by changing our result verbs in Romance languages into manner verbs in English. For instance, remove out of the water, we can fish it out. Resultative constructions, which also include these manner verbs. Wipe the table clean. Passive construction is very good for impersonal presentation of information. Nominalization is a great cohesion strategy, and it also helps us summarize information. The gerund in Romance languages is a valid strategy for talking about logical connections, but we want to express those logical connections in English. We want to help the reader parse the information better with parallel structure, getting rid of ambiguity, using punctuation correctly, restating for flow, and reshaping paragraphs for information flow. These are some of the strategies we saw, and I have time for questions. Yes?
Could you explain the difference between a verb frame language and a satellite frame language?
So a verb frame language is a language in which the, yes, thank you. What is the difference between a verb frame language and a satellite frame language? A satellite frame language is a language where the result is expressed outside of the verb. And a verb frame language is a language in which the result is expressed inside the verb. So, for instance, Italian, if you say uscire, go out. That's why in Spanish, salir. That's why it's redundant to say salir afuera, bajar abajo, subir arriba. In English, we can say exit because we have Latin verbs, which we inherited from this Romance ancestry.
Yeah.
But we say go out, walk out, right out. He walked out of the room. So we use the manner in the verb and the result through a particle, through a preposition. And that's why we can use resultatives much easier. Dance the night away. How do you say that? Which language you work with? French? How do we say that in French? Danser toute la nuit. And is it the same as dance the night away? No.
The night doesn't go.
Because we cannot say that. It's one of those things that is so cool to when you know different languages. It's a different way of. Those are the glasses that people talk about when different languages give you different glasses to see the world. You can you translate it? Yes. Do you understand it exactly the same way? No. And it's okay. Yes.
You said you had a password if you wanted to look at some of the slides again?
Oh, yes. So I can, my website is languagecompass.com, and I can give you my card. Click on the link. The link is obvious, 8860. The password is also pretty easy, 882090. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yes, absolutely. No, you can click on it and get it from LinkedIn. Sure. Okay. Yes, yes, all right. Thank you so much. I'm 88, and let's see, so people probably put it down, right?
I hope so. I see you're saying one other.
Yes.
Would it be possible to grab a coffee?
Absolutely, yes, yes. Yes.
So we're all.
Yeah.
Such a helpful talk. Yeah.
Oh, but excellent.
This is
I'm
really,
very,
really
I'm
helpful
very
talk.
glad.
So many good techniques. So thank you.
Oh, yes, yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Baba.
Ready to go? Yes. Sí. Acá esto de la... Sí, vale. Now it's set up. We had this morning, but it's all done now.
Good. You rehearsed it for me.
Nope. Sorry. Excelente, ya te la
Right? So coming up ATA 2019. ¿Qué es una tarjeta? ¿Vas a nada?
Sí, y la anoto el paso rápidamente.
Sí.
Bueno, se lo pido a alguien más.
Hasta 2019.
Hasta 2000.
Hasta con mayúscula, 2019.
I ran out of business cards yesterday. That's just like a backlog.
Okay, that's all right.
Hasta 2019. ¿Y el usuario?
No hay usuario, solamente para eso.
Hasta 2019. Perfecto. Muy bien, estupendo.